and welcome to the latest in our stories from the Strongrooms series. In this instalment, we take a look at maritime missionary activity in Hull during the 19th and 20th centuries, and we highlight the surviving archive of the mission to seafarers. This is part 2 of a 2-part talk. Don't forget to subscribe to the History Centre's channel for notifications whenever a new video is uploaded. And I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people. Revelations 14:6, King James Bible. In the first part of this talk, we explored the background to the development of missionary activity in Hull. We closed at the formation of the National Missions to Seamen in 1856. In this part, we look at how the society began to operate in Hull and how things developed at the local level. The first mention in Hull we find in the minute books of the Missions to Seamen is in 1873, 17 years after the initial founding of the society. A minute from the meeting held the 4th of March 1873 records the decision by the committee that a reader could be placed at Hull if it was wished. A couple of months later, a Mr. Fish was appointed reader at the salary of £80 per year. Perhaps with so much pre-existing missionary activity in Hull, the committee was testing the waters. They must have seen a need though, as just a month later, the committee appointed Reverend J.F. Bishard as chaplain at a salary of £200 per year in place of Mr. Fisher's reader post. Amongst his duties, it appears that Bishard was given permission in April 1875 by the Society to conduct Sunday services on board the HMS Endymion when requested by the ship's captain. On the 4th of May 1875, we find that Reverend Bishard asked permission of the committee to rent a room for use as a mission room in Hull. A visit was made by the Society's superintendent to report on the situation, but we don't know what the result of that visit was. However, it was likely that the request was granted, as we find references to a debt on a mission room needing to be settled in May 1876, and the decision being taken to continue renting the building only if funds could be collected for its operation on the spot. There's no note in the minutes as to where this building was located. We next hear significant mention of a mission room in 1886. In February 1886, a legacy was left to the Hull branch. This appears to have caused some confusion, there being no official Hull branch or committee of the Missions to Seamen in existence. Headquarters consulted solicitors, and the legacy was given directly to Hull staff in November 1886 to support the expenses of the mission room. Perhaps because of this additional financial support, in May 1887 the committee approved of the chaplain raising a further £200 to pay for a new mission house at Alexandra Dock to support Hull's fishermen. The new Alexandra Dock Institute opened on the 1st of July 1887. An agreement relating to the institute survives. It was made on the 21st of April 1888 between the Hull, Barnsley and West Riding Junction Railway and Dock Company and Frederick Cleave of London as chairman of the Mission to Seamen Society. Under the terms of the agreement, 145.75 square yards were rented by the Society, effective retroactively from the 1st of March 1887 at a yearly rent of £1. The tenancy could be terminated at any time by either party with 3 months' notice. Any buildings erected on the land by the tenant whilst rent was paid up could be pulled down by the tenant whilst the rent was paid up. The agreement goes on to mention the Jubilee Mission Room, which is noted to have already been erected by the tenant on the said piece of land. Stipulation is made that the hall shall only be used to hold mission services, that it is not to be used to provide refreshment, and that the holding of all of the meetings required the consent of the dock company. However, in September 1889, the dock authorities required the Society to move the location of the mission room to another site on the dock. The move seems to have been detrimental to the operation of the Society at the dock, as can be seen in a minute recorded the 2nd of April 1901, which stated, "The Alexandra Dock Institute, having been found to be in the wrong position and being little frequented by seamen, it may be taken down and either sold or moved to another site as the superintendent shall determine." But the full story of the mission to seamen in Hull is not one of an isolated society undertaking activities in a lonely mission room on the docks. Returning to the chaplain Reverend Bishard, his resignation in November 1875 appears to have been a driving force behind the Society seeking closer ties to existing organisations. Following his resignation, the Society's only representative in Hull was a scripture reader named Mr. Madison. To combat this problem, the Society considered appointing another chaplain. They also considered asking whether the vicars of 3 local waterside parishes would serve as honorary chaplains, supporting a ship visiting reader each. To this end, in April 1876, Reverend J. McCormick, Vicar of Hull, was asked to become an honorary chaplain, taking charge of 2 readers for work amongst the ships in his parish. At the same time, Reverend J. Elam of St. Peter's Drypool was asked to oversee 1 reader for similar work. We know that McCormick accepted the honorary chaplaincy, but it isn't clear what happened with Elam. A couple of months later, the committee decided that the Society's work in Hull might be officially connected with the existing Mariners' Church and set out to report on the feasibility of such a plan. This led to the appointment in June 1876 of Reverend S. Allwood, incumbent of the Mariners' Church, as the Society's chaplain at a salary of £50 per year. His duties were to be the visiting of ships in port, the oversight of the Society's readers in Hull, and ministry to pupils on board the training ship Southampton. And so the early history of the missions to seamen in Hull appears to have been heavily reliant on cooperation with existing local Church of England ministries. There's a quietness in the minutes from the late 1870s to the mid-1880s. Presumably work ticked along quite happily on a local level. The next major mention of Hull comes in 1886, when it is noted that Charles Henry Wilson, a Hull MP, is building a new institute in Postongate. The Postongate project is the same one planned by the local Sailors' Rest Society, which we heard about a little while back. Plans were drawn up and shown to the committee in June. By December 1886, the committee had authorised Reverend Walter Radford Welch, the Society's chaplain, to sign an undertaking with Wilson, which allowed the Society full use of the building as a mission hall. A memorandum relating to this agreement survives in the port files of the Missions to Seamen's archive. The agreement records that Wilson granted Welch the free use and occupation of the new Postongate Institute for the purposes of conducting missionary services and classes for seamen. It also records that Wilson permitted Welch to supply catering and refreshments to seamen at his own risk and responsibility. There were conditions. Welch had to keep and maintain the hall at his own expense under the care of a resident caretaker. He also had to ensure all furniture, fixtures and fittings that he brought into the building, and Wilson was to be allowed the free use of the hall and the Society's furniture when he required it. And so Postongate became the base of the Missions to Seamen's activities in Hull. This demonstrates that the Society's chaplain was working closely with both the Mariners' Church Society and the Sailors' Rest Society before the 2 organisations amalgamated in 1899. But yet closer cooperation was to come, this time driven by local factors. On the 2nd of February 1897, a letter was read to the committee. It was from Reverend Curry, who had been appointed chaplain in 1895, following the resignation of Reverend John Parker, who had succeeded Reverend Welch as the Hull chaplain in 1891. In the letter, Curry reported that Charles Wilson MP, the same Wilson who had helped the Society with the Postongate Institute, was making efforts to raise funds locally to secure a seamen's church. In response to the letter, the committee resolved to inform Curry that the Society recognised the great want of a seamen's church for so important a port of Hull, and would be very glad if any arrangements could be made to provide one. Now this is surprising, as the Mariners' Church Society was still in existence, still had an incumbent, and seemingly still occupied the Mariners' Church building. However, a look at the minute book of the Mariners' Church Society, which is also held at the History Centre, suggests it was struggling financially, that the building was in need of repairs, that meetings were being held in the vestry of Holy Trinity Church, and that motions were already in place to bring all of the Society's property together and place it in a single trust deed in 1896. Further research is needed, but it seems like the church building was closed due to necessary repairs, hence the reference to there being no dedicated church for seamen in Hull. Another factor could have been the resignation of the incumbent of the Mariners' Church in 1896, which would have left the Society with no minister. And so we find, in the minutes of a meeting held by the Mariners' Church Society on the 3rd of February 1899, a resolution to amalgamate with the Sailors' Rest Society, which organisation was already working in connection with the missions to seamen. We see from the minutes that Charles Wilson MP was on the committees of both societies, and so must have formed a pivotal link between the two. Later the same day, another meeting was held, this time at the offices of Charles Wilson. It was attended by committee members from the Mariners' Church Society, the Sailors' Rest Society, and the chaplain of the missions to seamen, Reverend Curry. At this meeting, a subcommittee was formed, including Curry, to consider the details of the proposed amalgamation. It was also stated that Wilson had received an offer from the owners of the Mariners' Church building to purchase the same at a cost of £1,850, and it was resolved that he do so with the proceeds of a bazaar recently held by the Sailors' Rest Society and the Missions to Seamen. A subsequent meeting of the subcommittee set down the laws of the newly amalgamated society, stating it is to be called the Hull Mariners' Church and Sailors' Rest Society in connection with the missions to seamen. Finally, on the 21st of February 1899, Headquarters Committee resolved to gratefully accept the offer of the use of the Mariners' Church and to send thanks to Mr. Charles Wilson, and to express appreciation for Reverend Curry's exertions. The same minutes also note that Wilson allowed the missions to seamen in Hull the use of classrooms and assistant chaplaincy house to accommodate Reverend H. Martin Holderness, who had been appointed on the 16th of June 1896 to support the growing work in Hull. And so the work of ministering to seafarers in the port of Hull became further entwined with that of existing local groups. So locally, we can see that there was fruitful cooperation between the missions to seamen staff and the newly formed local Mariners' Church and Sailors' Rest Society, which was in effect a continuation of the cooperation that had been taking place since the 1870s. But back at headquarters, there was a developing uncertainty regarding local operations. It seems that there was some confusion around the proceeds of a bazaar that was organised locally by Charles Wilson and the Sailors' Rest Society in order to raise funds for the Mariners' Church purchase. In February 1898, the committee sent their thanks to the chaplain at Hull for a contribution of £3,100, which had been raised by the sale of his work towards the new Seamen's Church and additional institute accommodation. A year later, we find headquarters auditors have asked for statements from Charles Wilson concerning £2,000 raised by the sale of works at this same bazaar. Over the next few months, various mentions of the money appear in the minutes, with the superintendent of the missions to seamen being asked to ascertain what's gone on. It appears that locally, the fundraising was considered to have been undertaken by the Sailors' Rest Society, with help from the missions to seamen's chaplain, whereas headquarters seems to have felt that because of the involvement of their own chaplain, they had some claim to the funds. After some back and forth, it appears that headquarters accepted the status of the funds as local, and in June 1899 we find a note in the minutes that the superintendent of the society is to watch the expenditure of the £2,000 as far as is possible. Further controversy developed in 1900, following the creation of the Mariners' Church and Sailors' Rest Society, and concerning the connection of the missions to seamen to that society. On the 6th of November 1900, a subcommittee was formed by headquarters to consider the whole state of the Hull station and report to the General Committee. The subcommittee met on the 1st of December and determined that Charles Wilson was about to hand over the Postern Gate Institute to the same body of trustees who held the Mariners' Church. They found that there was a generally expressed desire on the part of the local supporters to keep in touch and work loyally with the missions to seamen, and the honorary secretary in Hull was anxious to raise more money in Hull for the General Headquarters Fund. Then letters were read from Reverend Curry, the Hull chaplain, and former reader Mr. Lowcock, who highlighted the formation of the Mariners' Church and Sailors' Rest Society in connection with the missions to seamen. This was determined to have been done without the knowledge of headquarters, and the subcommittee resolved to meet again to interview Curry on the matter. This second meeting took place a week later. Curry was interviewed and informed the committee that the Mariners' Church and Sailors' Rest Society was formed in 1899 and that he had been appointed chaplain of that society at the same time. He explained that the title Mariners' Church and Sailors' Rest Society in connection with the missions to seamen was used as a header on the note paper used in the Postern Gate Institute. He informed the subcommittee that the local society was entirely responsible for the upkeep of the Postern Gate Institute, but that, as the missions to seamen's chaplain, he alone controlled the readers. The local society was said to be in a flourishing condition financially, the support having increased considerably since 1895. A ladies' committee was being formed with the Countess of Chesterfield at its head to raise funds, half of which were to go to the local society and half to the general fund. Curry agreed to send the local society's annual accounts for 1899 and 1900 and stated that the local society was quite willing that they should be included in the missions to seamen's accounts. He noted that the Alexandra Dock Institute was not in the best place, the work done there was small, and its funds were still separate to the Postern Gate Institute's fund. Curry also assured the subcommittee that there was no inclination on the part of the local society to break off from the missions to seamen, but on the contrary, they wished to work in perfect harmony with headquarters. He did note, however, that the local society thought that the missions to seamen did not wish to work with them any longer. He explained that it was advisable to keep the title of Mariners' Church for the sake of old associations, and that the word Sailors' Rest had been adapted to distinguish it from the Bethel, which was called the Seamen's Institute. The subcommittee agreed that the interview with Curry was on the whole satisfactory, and that it should remove any misunderstandings that may have existed between headquarters and their friends in Hull. And so work continued, but there was still no official local branch of the missions to seamen in Hull. Over the course of the next few decades, there seemed to have been small skirmishes between headquarters and the local society. As outsiders coming into a building owned by another society, The chaplains often encountered resistance to change from the permanent staff at the Postongate Institute, who were appointed by the Mariners' Church and Sailors' Rest Society. There are several expressions in the minutes to the effect that it would be better if the society could have its own institute, which could be governed by its own rules. On the flip side, problems between chaplains and the local society's committee members, who had no control over appointments to the chaplaincy, repeatedly led to run-ins between the local society and headquarters. Hull appears to have been a problem pot for all involved. Not having its own useful premises in Hull, and in order for them to be able to operate in a meaningful way, the missions to seamen had been reliant on goodwill and local agreements for around 70 years. And so the picture we arrive at is one of uneasy tension between outside national influence and local operation. But by the 1930s, things were changing. The buildings owned by the Mariners' Church and Sailors' Rest Society were becoming tired and finances were stretched. The Second World War worsened the situation when damage was done to several of the society's properties. As Hull struggled to cope with the ravages of war, the money and support that headquarters could offer might have seemed like a lifeline to the local society. But at the same time, the wartime period had presented new opportunities. An increase in Indian sailors passing through the port provided a new focus for joint efforts, with both headquarters and the local society working on an even keel in a venture to provide a hostel for these men. A new chaplain, Reverend Brandram, was appointed in 1942 and seemed to develop a good relationship with the local society. Then in June 1943 came notice from the local society that they wished to wind up activity at the Sailors' Home and to offer the premises to headquarters. A month later, a resolution was passed by the local society that they should open negotiations with the missions to seamen, with the object of the latter taking over the society's buildings, improving the same, and carrying on the work for seamen, this to include the balance of the society's assets. An agreement was made in October 1943, and the committee of the local society became the local committee of the missions to seamen for all activities in Hull. The Postongate building, which was in desperate need of repairs, was revamped in 1944, and the Salthouse Lane premises were fully renovated, reopening in 1946 as the Hull Flying Angel Club. The local committee set about its work with renewed vigour. In 1948, a Ladies' Harbour Lights Guild was established. The guild membership consisted of women from the local churches who volunteered to help with spiritual and social work. Activities included hospital visiting, acting as hostesses at the Flying Angel Club on an evening, attending services at the Mariners' Church, organising entertainments, and producing knitted items of clothing to be donated to seafarers. Various types of entertainment were arranged for seafarers at the Flying Angel Club. Dances, film shows, beetle drives, community singing and gramophone recitals all formed part of the programme of events. In addition, facilities for engaging in pastimes such as cards, table tennis, billiards, snooker and darts were also provided. Outdoor entertainment was also provided in port. During the 1940s, football matches and boxing tournaments were arranged for visiting seafarers. Sporting competitions were set up to allow ship's crews to participate in cricket, rugby and football. Local teams were put together so that crews could compete against them, and it was not unheard of that the port chaplains themselves would take part in the matches. Hospital visits had always formed part of the work of the port chaplain, and this work continued throughout the 20th century. Visiting seafarers who had been taken ill in port and had been admitted to hospital could expect a visit from the chaplain. These individuals were often away from home in a foreign port and might have no one else to pay them visits. The chaplain, as well as offering spiritual guidance, would often try to help practically, for example, through the provision of additional clothing, reading material, or small amounts of financial aid. The work of the chaplain outside of the Institute also extended to the visiting of lightships crews and keepers at rock or offshore lighthouses. Parcels of books, knitwear and food collected by local supporters were delivered by chaplains during such visits. In Hull, the chaplain undertook to visit the lights along the Humber, including the Spurn lightship. This photograph is a particular favourite of ours here at the University Archives. It shows the port chaplain about to deliver a Christmas parcel to the crew of the Spurn around 1965. Hull was a busy stop for many Indian crews during the 20th century. As such, the Society saw a need to support these individuals. With significant language barriers, it was felt that a separate institute run by a caretaker who spoke a number of Indian languages might be beneficial. In February 1943, an Indian seaman's hut was opened on Heddon Road. It contained pool tables and projection equipment to show Indian language films. It proved popular and was very well used, so much so that the Society took the decision to rebuild and extend in 1966. Around this time, Hull Council announced the compulsory purchase of the Salthouse Lane building to make way for the redevelopment of public space. The Society took the decision to sell the Postongate Institute and to build a new combined Flying Angel Club and church on Heddon Road. The new building opened in 1969 and proved very popular with its modern equipment and continued social entertainments. And so the Society continued to operate in Hull throughout the 20th century. Today, the Heddon Road Club is no longer in use, and the Society works in conjunction with the local branch of the Apostleship of the Sea, a similar organisation run by the Catholic Church. The new centre is located near the ferry terminal, close to one of the few remaining places seafarers are still likely to enter Hull. We hope you've enjoyed this look at missionary activity in Hull. If you're interested in finding out more, why not visit us to consult the records of the missions to seamen for free in our search room.